I still remember the sound of her voice that morning, soft, trembling, almost broken. "Emma," she said, "it's cancer." It was the kind of word that freezes the air between sentences, the kind that makes everything ordinary, the kettle boiling, the clock ticking, feel cruel for daring to continue. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone pressed against my ear, listening to my sister sob. Sophie had always been the strong one, louder, brighter, the one who could walk into any room and make it feel like sunlight had followed her in. But that morning, she sounded small. "Stage 3, she whispered. "Ovarian. They say it's aggressive." My heart dropped into my stomach. I didn't even realize I was crying until my husband, Mark, came into the room, confused and worried. I couldn't speak, just handed him the phone. He listened for maybe 10 seconds before wrapping his arm around me. "We'll get through this," he said quietly, the way people do when they're trying to steady themselves as much as you. That was the morning everything changed, not just for Sophie, but for all of us. Back then, our lives were peaceful in that simple, suburban kind of way, routines stitched together by work, grocery lists, and small joys. I worked part-time at the local library. Mark ran his small carpentry business, and our parents, retired and living 2 streets away, spent their days gardening or volunteering at church. Sophie and I weren't as close as we used to be, not because we'd fought, but because time had quietly built space between us. She was 5 years younger, spontaneous where I was careful, fiery where I was cautious. We'd grown into different worlds, but that phone call pulled us back into the same one overnight. Within hours, our family group chat was flooded with messages, prayers, doctor suggestions, meal plans, and endless heart emojis that felt too fragile for something this heavy. Dad called me 3 times in one day, asking if I'd heard more details. Mom barely spoke. She just cried quietly whenever Sophie's name came up. By evening, I drove over to Sophie's apartment with soup I knew she wouldn't eat and a notebook full of questions. Oncologist names, second opinions, treatment centers. It was how I coped, by organizing the chaos. When she opened the door, she looked tired but radiant in that way only she could manage, hair pulled back in a messy bun, cheeks flushed, eyes rimmed red. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," she said, voice cracking. "I just didn't want to make it real." I hugged her, tighter than I had in years. There was something trembling beneath her calm, but I didn't see it then. I only saw my little sister, terrified and brave at the same time. The weeks that followed felt like a blur of hope and fear woven together. Doctors' visits, scans, blood tests, all shared through tearful phone calls and late-night texts. She told us the doctors were optimistic, that she'd start chemotherapy soon. Dad set up a family fundraiser for Sophie's treatment, the page read, decorated with a photo of her smiling beside a sunflower field. People donated faster than I could refresh the page. Church friends, coworkers, even old classmates, everyone wanted to help. By the end of the first week, the total crossed $10,000. By the second, it was $18,000. We were overwhelmed, grateful, and determined to make sure Sophie had everything she needed. She began posting updates on Facebook, photos in hospital gowns, captions about strength and gratitude. Her words were poetic, almost too perfect. Hair can fall, but faith doesn't. They went viral locally. People began calling her an inspiration. And I believed every word. But then, little things started to bother me, small inconsistencies, like a thread sticking out of a perfect seam. The first time was during one of our hospital visits. I offered to come with her for chemo, to sit beside her, bring snacks, hold her hand. She hesitated. "I'd rather go alone," she said. "It's too hard seeing everyone emotional. I need to stay strong." It made sense. Sophie had always been private when it came to pain. But when I asked which hospital she was going to, she fumbled the name, then changed the subject. Later, Mom asked the same question. She said Sophie's tone shifted, like she'd swallowed a lie before answering. Still, we brushed it off. You don't doubt someone who says they're dying. You tell yourself she's just overwhelmed, exhausted, maybe even confused. That's what I told myself too. Months passed, and Sophie's updates grew more dramatic. She posted photos with a headscarf, pale makeup, shaky smiles. One caption read, Round 4 complete. Every scar is proof that I'm still fighting. Her followers multiplied. Donations kept coming in, not just money, but care packages, gift cards, handmade blankets. She even started an awareness blog called Sophie Strong. Meanwhile, I noticed something strange: her hair. It never seemed to thin. Not even once. I told Mark one evening while washing dishes. Maybe she's wearing a wig, he said. Maybe, I murmured. But when she came over for dinner the next weekend, I saw her adjust her bun, natural roots, healthy shine. She laughed, talked about faith and hope, showed no sign of fatigue. If she was fighting for her life, she didn't look like it. That night, when I hugged her goodbye, I caught a faint scent of perfume, jasmine and vanilla. The same one she'd worn for years. And for some reason, it made me ache. Because sick people don't usually smell like comfort. They smell like hospitals. The turning point came quietly. A small envelope in my mailbox, unmarked, plain, with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a printout, an appointment summary from the Regional Cancer Center. The patient's name, Sophie Harris. Diagnosis, no malignancy detected. Follow-up, routine wellness check. The date was from 2 months before her treatment updates. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at that piece of paper as if it might explain itself. My mind kept trying to find another explanation. Maybe it was an old result. Maybe the hospital made a mistake. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't real. But the truth was staring right at me. My sister wasn't sick. She never had been. And in that moment, 1,000 images flashed before my eyes. Mom crying in church pews, Dad organizing bake sales, strangers sending donations. All of it built on a lie. I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a whisper. Oh, Sophie, what have you done? That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, that printout burning in my mind like a confession left under a spotlight. Every sound in the house felt louder: the hum of the fridge, the soft tick of the clock, the wind brushing against the window pane. Mark stirred beside me. You're still awake? I found something, I whispered. My throat was dry. About Sophie. He turned toward me, his brow furrowed. What kind of something? I handed him the paper. He squinted in the dim light, reading it twice before exhaling slowly. Are you sure this is real? I don't know. I rubbed my temples. But it was in our mailbox. No note, no sender. Just this. Mark sat up, leaning against the headboard. If this is true, Emma, that means I know. The words spilled out before he could finish. It means she's been lying to us. To everyone. The air between us grew heavy. Neither of us said another word. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house with the paper tucked inside my purse, folded neatly like something sacred and terrible. Mom was in the kitchen, her hands buried in flour, baking muffins for Sophie's next chemo session. She smiled when she saw me. You're just in time. I made the lemon one Sophie likes. I stood there for a moment, watching her, the way her shoulders moved, how she hummed softly while scooping batter. There was so much love in every motion. And suddenly the thought of breaking her heart felt unbearable. Mom, I said quietly, can we sit down for a second? She wiped her hands on her apron, concern flickering across her face. What's wrong? Is Sophie okay? I hesitated. The truth sat like a stone in my throat. I think my voice shook. I think she's not sick. Mom blinked. What are you talking about? I slid the paper across the table. She adjusted her glasses, reading it line by line. When she reached the end, she looked up at me, her eyes confused, frightened. This must be a mistake, she said. Sophie's been in treatment for months. She posts photos, I know. I swallowed hard. But something isn't adding up. Mom's hands trembled slightly as she set the paper down. Who sent you this? I don't know. It came in the mail. For a long moment, she just sat there, silent, still, staring at the countertop like it might offer answers. Then she said softly, we need to ask her. That afternoon, we called Sophie and asked her to come over for dinner. She showed up cheerful as ever, wearing her usual soft pink cardigan, hair in a bun, her face glowing with that familiar warmth. It was hard to believe the person standing at our door might be living a lie. "Smells amazing in here," she said, hugging Mom, then me. "What's the occasion?" "Just dinner," Mom said, too quickly. "Family dinner." We sat around the table, roast chicken, potatoes, salad, everything normal. Too normal. The kind of normal that hums with unspoken tension. Sophie talked about her doctor and how her latest scan looked promising. I watched her closely, the way her eyes darted when she spoke, how her voice would catch slightly whenever Mom asked a question. After dessert, Mom reached for the folded paper. "Sophie," she said, her voice trembling, "we got something in the mail." Sophie froze mid-sip of tea. "What do you mean?" Mom placed the paper on the table. The sound it made, just that thin rustle of paper, felt deafening. Sophie's eyes flicked down to it, then back up. For a split second, I saw it: fear. Real, raw animal fear. Then she composed herself. "This is fake," she said quickly. "Someone's trying to hurt me." "Who?" I asked. My voice was calm, but my heart was pounding. "Who would go through this much trouble, Sophie?" She glared at me. "I don't know. Maybe some jealous coworker? People online can be cruel, Emma. You have no idea what I've been through." Her tone cut sharp. It was defensive, practiced. But behind it, I could hear the crack, the hesitation between her words. Mom's voice wavered. "Sweetheart, if there's something you haven't told us..." "There isn't," Sophie snapped. "I can't believe you'd even question me after everything I've been through." She pushed back her chair so hard it scraped the floor. "You think I'd make this up?" she shouted. The sound of her voice shattered something in the room. "Sophie, please," I said gently. "We just want the truth." Tears filled her eyes. "You know what? I don't have to prove anything to you." She grabbed her bag and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The silence afterward felt endless. Mom covered her face with her hands and began to cry, quiet, heartbroken sobs that sounded like something breaking inside her. Dad came in from the garden, confused and alarmed, and I told him everything. He stood there, expression unreadable, then walked outside without a word. I sat beside Mom, holding her shaking hand. I'd hoped confronting Sophie would bring clarity, truth, maybe even relief. Instead, it left us with more questions. That night, my phone buzzed with a message. "Sophie, you had no right." Me, I needed to know the truth. "Sophie, you don't know what you've done." Me, then tell me. Sophie, typing, then deleting, then silence. I stared at the screen for a long time. For the first time in my life, I was afraid of my sister. Not because she was dangerous, but because I didn't recognize her anymore. The next morning, Dad showed up at my door. He looked pale, his jaw tight. "I went to the hospital," he said. My stomach dropped. "What?" I asked for her doctor. The one she said she was seeing. He pulled a crumpled note from his pocket, a contact Sophie had written down weeks ago. The nurse said there's no record of a patient by that name. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. All the denial, all the excuses, all the doubt gone. There it was. The truth, simple and undeniable. Sophie had never been a patient. She had never been treated for cancer. And our family had raised nearly $30,000 for her treatments. Dad sat at the kitchen table, his hands clasped so tightly the knuckles had gone white. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "She lied to us," he said quietly. "To all of us." I poured him some coffee, though neither of us touched it. The smell filled the air, bitter and sharp, the kind of scent that reminds you how ordinary life insists on continuing, even when yours has just cracked open. "She must have had a reason," I said softly, almost to myself. "Maybe she's scared." "Maybe, Emma," he interrupted, his voice heavy with something I'd never heard before, disappointment. "There's no reason good enough for this." He pushed his chair back and stood up. "Your mother's heart can't take this kind of betrayal. You know that." I nodded. "I know." He walked to the window, staring out at the gray morning sky. "We'll give her a chance to explain," he said finally. "But this time, no more lies." That afternoon, Sophie texted me again. "Sophie, can we talk?" "Alone." I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one knows your name, and everything smells like cinnamon and regret. She was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window, her eyes hidden behind sunglasses even though it was cloudy. Her scarf, the one she'd always worn in her treatment photos, was looped loosely around her neck. For a moment, I almost felt sorry. For her. Almost. She looked up, forcing a smile. "You look tired." "So do you," I said. She sighed. "I know what you're thinking. But it's not what it looks like." "Then tell me what it is," I said. "Because right now, it looks like you lied about having cancer and took money from people who love you." She flinched, eyes darting toward the window. "It started small. I didn't mean for it to go this far." "Go this far?" I repeated. "You let our parents think you were dying, Sophie." Her voice cracked. I didn't know how to stop. The cafe noise faded around us, the clinking cups, the low chatter, until it was just her and me, and the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do something like this?" Tears filled her eyes, but I wasn't sure if they were real or just another performance. "I lost my job," she said. "My rent was overdue, my credit cards maxed out. I didn't know how to tell anyone. And then, when I said I wasn't feeling well, everyone suddenly cared. For the first time in years, people noticed me." I stared at her. "So you made yourself sick?" She nodded, shame flickering across her face. "At first, it was just a story to get out of work. But then Mom cried. Dad hugged me. Everyone rallied around me. I felt loved. Loved." I repeated, my voice trembling with disbelief. "Sophie, we always loved you." Her shoulders shook. "Not like that. Not all at once. Not completely." There it was, the truth, raw and pathetic and heartbreaking all at once. She hadn't done it for money. Not really. She'd done it for attention. For belonging. But knowing that didn't make it easier to forgive. "I can fix it," she said quickly, leaning forward. "I'll donate the money. I'll tell people I'm in remission." I cut her off. "No. You're going to tell them the truth." Her eyes widened. "Emma, I can't. They'll hate me. They'll hate the lie more." Her hands shook as she reached for her cup. "You don't understand what that kind of shame feels like." "Don't I?" I said sharply. "I've spent months watching Mom pray for you, watching Dad age 10 years in 6 months. Do you have any idea what that did to us?" Her lip trembled. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone." "But you did," I said. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, a storm had started, light rain streaking down the glass, the sky turning the color of old bruises. Finally, I stood up. "You need to tell them, Sophie." "Before I do." She looked up at me, panic in her eyes. "You wouldn't." "I will," I said. "Not because I want to hurt you, but because the truth deserves to breathe." That night, I told my parents everything, what Sophie had said, what she'd confessed. Mom cried quietly at first, then louder, the kind of cry that shakes the whole body. Dad sat motionless, staring at the table. "She said she wanted to feel loved," I whispered. Mom's voice broke. "We loved her every day of her life." Dad stood suddenly, his chair scraping against the tile. "She's coming here tomorrow. And she's going to explain herself." The next day, Sophie arrived just after lunch. Her eyes were red, her face pale, her confidence gone. She looked smaller somehow, like the lie had finally begun to crush her. Mom didn't speak at first. She just sat there, clutching a handkerchief. Dad folded his arms. "Start talking." Sophie swallowed hard. "I made it up," she said softly. "All of it." Mom's gasp was small but sharp, the kind that cuts deeper than shouting ever could. "I'm so sorry," Sophie continued. "I thought I could control it. But it got bigger, and then I didn't know how to stop." Dad's voice was cold. "You let people give up their savings, their time, their prayers." Tears streamed down her face. "I'll pay it back. Every cent." "With what?" he snapped. "You don't even have a job." "I'll find a way," she whispered. The room fell silent. Only the ticking of the wall clock filled the space, slow, merciless. Then Mom stood, walked over, and placed her hand gently on Sophie's cheek. "Do you know what hurts the most?" she said softly. "Not the money. Not the lie. It's that you thought you had to invent pain to be worthy of love." Sophie broke down completely, falling to her knees, sobbing. Mom knelt beside her, holding her like she had when we were children, one arm around her shoulders, one hand brushing the hair from her face. Dad turned away, his eyes glistening. I wanted to feel relief. But all I felt was grief for the family we'd been before that lie took root. For the next few days, the house felt like a church after the funeral, quiet, heavy, full of ghosts that hadn't yet learned how to leave. No one knew what to say. Mom moved through the rooms like she was afraid of breaking something fragile. Dad barely spoke at all. And Sophie, she stopped showing up altogether. We didn't hear from her for almost a week. No calls, no messages. Just silence. At first, I told myself she needed time. That she was ashamed. That maybe she was trying to find a way to fix things. But when Mom started waking up in the middle of the night crying, I knew the silence had become its own kind of cruelty. So, one morning, I decided to go find her. Her apartment was small, cluttered, and full of reminders of the life she'd pretended to live. Stacks of unopened mail sat on the counter. Empty mugs littered the coffee table. And on the fridge, dozens of "Get well soon" cards, each one a love letter to a lie. When she opened the door, she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Dark circles, trembling hands, that hollow look of someone carrying too much shame. "Emma," she said quietly, her voice thin. I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "I've been worried about you." "I couldn't face anyone," she murmured. "Everywhere I look, I see what I did." I glanced at the cards again. Bright colors, hopeful messages, photos of people smiling. It made my stomach twist. "Have you thought about how to make it right?" I asked. She sank onto the couch, her eyes wet. "I don't even know where to start." "You start with the truth," I said. "Publicly. To everyone who gave you money, to everyone who prayed for you." Her lip trembled. "You want me to destroy what little dignity I have left?" "No," I said softly. "I want you to earn it back." That night, she posted a statement online. It wasn't perfect, messy, raw, written through tears, but it was honest. She admitted everything, that she'd faked her diagnosis, that she'd taken money under false pretenses, that she was sorry. She promised to repay what she could, even if it took years. And then she ended with, "I didn't lie because I hated anyone. I lied because I hated myself." Within minutes, the comments started pouring in. Some were kind. "Thank you for telling the truth." Most were not. "You deserve jail. People like you ruin real cancer stories. I hope you never show your face again." I sat beside her as she read them, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. "This is worse than dying," she whispered. I didn't disagree. The fallout was brutal. The local church stopped speaking to her. Her friends blocked her. The fundraiser site took down the page and flagged her name permanently. And yet, I couldn't walk away. As much as I hated what she'd done, she was still my sister. There's a strange kind of pain that comes with loving someone who's hurt you, the ache of loyalty fighting against logic. Every time I looked at her, I saw flashes of the girl who used to sneak into my bed during thunderstorms. The one who'd cry over sad movies and swear she'd grow up to change the world. That girl was still in there somewhere, buried under the wreckage. Weeks passed. Sophie found part-time work at a thrift store. It didn't pay much, but it was something. She stopped wearing the scarf, stopped pretending. Mom started visiting her again, quietly, secretly at first, like she was sneaking grace past Dad's pride. Sometimes she'd bring leftover dinner. Sometimes just flowers. She said, "Love doesn't disappear just because it's been lied to." Dad wasn't so quick to forgive. He refused to mention Sophie's name, even when Mom did. One night at dinner, he finally said, "She broke something that can't be fixed." I wanted to argue, but I didn't. Because he wasn't entirely wrong. Then one morning, about 2 months after everything came out, I got a call. It was Sophie. Her voice was shaking. "They fired me." "Why?" I asked. "Someone found the article," she said. "About the fundraiser. They didn't want the bad press." I closed my eyes. "I'm so sorry." "I deserve it," she said quietly. "But I don't know how to keep going, Emma." Her words scared me. There was something final in the way she said them, like she'd already started to disappear from herself. "I'm coming over," I said immediately. When I got there, She was sitting on the floor by the window, knees pulled to her chest, staring at nothing. The curtains were open, and the afternoon light hit her face, pale, tired, human. "I don't think I can fix this," she said. "No one will ever look at me and not see what I did." I sat down beside her. "You can't erase it," I said. "But you can live differently now. That's how people learn to see you again." She looked at me, tears clinging to her lashes. "Do you believe that?" "I have to," I said. "Otherwise, what's the point of forgiveness?" We sat there until the sun dipped low, painting the room gold. And for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her, not hope, not yet, but the faint shape of it. Later that week, she started volunteering at the hospice center, folding laundry, sorting flowers, bringing tea to families in the waiting room. She told me it made her feel small in a good way. "I can't undo what I did," she said. "But maybe I can do something that matters." I smiled. That's a start. People didn't trust her at first. Some still whispered when she passed. But she didn't stop showing up. And little by little, they began to see her differently, not as the girl who lied, but as the woman trying to make it right. One evening, she called me from the hospice garden. "You should see the lilies," she said. "They're everywhere. Like the world decided to forgive me a little." I laughed softly. Maybe it did. For the first time in months, her voice sounded lighter. Then she said something I'll never forget. "You know, Emma, when I was pretending to be sick, I used to imagine what it would feel like to die loved. But now I think living honestly, even if people hate me for it, feels better." That was the first time I believed she might actually be okay. By the end of that year, Sophie had changed in ways I never thought possible. Not all at once, healing never works that way, but slowly, like the way dawn creeps across a room, inch by inch, until the dark finally realizes it's over. She'd moved into a smaller apartment closer to the hospice center. Her walls were bare, her furniture simple, no traces of the old life she'd built on lies. Sometimes, when I visited, she'd laugh about it. "I used to think I needed attention to feel alive," she said once. "Now I just want quiet." Mom had started including her again in family dinners. It wasn't the same as before, but it was something. She'd make Sophie's favorite soup, leave out the extra salt, and fuss over her like nothing had ever happened. I think it was Mom's way of rewriting the story, of turning guilt into love. Dad was slower to follow. He'd sit across from her, polite but distant. Sometimes, their eyes would meet and he'd look away, as if afraid that forgiveness might make him weak. But one night, that changed. It was a Sunday. Sophie had come over for dinner, bringing a bouquet of daisies she'd bought with her first paycheck from the hospice center. She handed them to Dad. "For Mom," she said quietly. He nodded, taking them wordlessly. The meal was quiet, the clinking of cutlery, louder than any of our words. Afterward, Sophie stood up to help clear the dishes. As she walked past Dad, she hesitated. "I know sorry doesn't mean much anymore," she said softly, her back half turned to him. "But I am. For all of it." He didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, he reached for his glass, set it down, and said, "You were always the stubborn one." I guess that hasn't changed. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly. But it was something close enough to start rebuilding from. Mom smiled, tears filling her eyes. Sophie's hands shook as she stacked the plates, but her face held a quiet peace. A few weeks later, Sophie told me she'd started speaking at support groups, not as a patient, but as someone who'd lived through self-inflicted chaos and come out the other side. "They call me the cautionary tale," she joked, but her eyes were soft with pride. The first time I went to hear her speak, I sat in the back of the church hall. There were about 20 people, men and women who'd all made mistakes big enough to scar their lives. Sophie stood at the front, her voice steady but gentle. "I used to think being seen was the same as being loved," she said. "But they're not. Being seen means people notice your pain. Being loved means they help you heal it, even when you don't deserve it." I watched the faces in the audience, some crying, some nodding, and realized that for the first time in years, my sister was telling the truth. And people were listening. That night, after the meeting, she and I walked to the car together. The air was crisp, full of the smell of rain-soaked leaves. "Do you think I'll ever make it right?" she asked suddenly. I thought about it before answering. I think making it right isn't something you finish, I said. It's something you live. She smiled at that, a small, tired, honest smile. You sound like Mom, she teased. I'll take that as a compliment. Months passed. Life fell into a rhythm again. The kind that doesn't erase the past, but folds it into the present like a scar you've learned to stop hiding. Then, one evening in late autumn, Sophie called me unexpectedly. Her voice was trembling. Can you come to the hospice garden? She asked. When I arrived, the air was cold and sharp, the kind of evening that smells like endings. She was standing under the willow tree, her coat wrapped tightly around her. They asked me to speak at the memorial service next week, she said. For families who lost loved ones this year. That's wonderful, I said. You should. She hesitated. I don't know if I can. Who am I to talk about loss? You know more about it than most, I said softly. You lost yourself once. She looked at me, her eyes glistening. Do you think people can ever really forgive something like what I did? I took her hand. I think forgiveness isn't something you wait for. It's something you earn, one honest day at a time. She nodded slowly, tears rolling down her cheeks. The memorial service was held the following Sunday. Candles lined the garden paths, their flames flickering in the wind. Families gathered in clusters, holding photos, whispering names into the night. When Sophie stepped up to the small podium, I held my breath. Her voice shook at first, but it grew steadier with every word. I don't have a story about losing someone, she said. I have a story about almost losing everyone because of a lie I told. I don't deserve your sympathy, but I do understand your pain. Grief isn't just for the dead. It's for all the versions of ourselves we'll never get back. The garden was silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. And then, as she finished, a woman in the crowd, someone I recognized from her old fundraiser group, stepped forward and hugged her. Just like that. No words. Just grace. Afterward, we sat by the fountain, watching the candles float across the water. Do you think I'll ever be forgiven? She asked again. I smiled. I think you already are. She let out a long, shaky breath. I hope you're right. I looked at her, this woman who had once been my biggest heartbreak, now my reminder that even broken things can bloom again. You're proof that the truth hurts, I said. But it also heals. When I drove home that night, the sky was full of stars, small, distant, patient. And for the first time since that lie began, I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt grateful. Grateful that she'd told the truth. Grateful that our family had survived it. Grateful that forgiveness, somehow, had found its way through the cracks. Winter came quietly that year. The kind of winter that muffles everything: footsteps, arguments, even memories. By then, Sophie had become a part of the hospice team full-time. They trusted her now. She'd earned it the hard way, through showing up, not words. I visited often. Sometimes to bring her lunch, sometimes just to sit with her during her break. She always had dirt on her hands from replanting flowers or carrying pots. It made her look more grounded, somehow, like she'd finally found where she belonged. One afternoon, while we were sitting in the hospice garden, she said, "Do you ever think people are given a second life? Not literally, but a second chance to live the first one better?" I smiled. Every morning. She nodded slowly. Then maybe this is mine. For a moment, the sun broke through the clouds, catching the edge of her hair, and I thought, yes, maybe it was. At home, Mom had grown softer too. I'd find her knitting scarves or humming to old songs again. Sometimes she'd stop mid-stitch and say, "She's trying, Emma." That's all I ever wanted, for her to try. And Dad. It took him nearly a year, but forgiveness found him too, in the quiet way it does when you stop resisting it. It happened one Sunday morning. Sophie had dropped by with fresh bread from the bakery near the hospice. She placed it on the counter and said, "I brought your favorite, Dad, the one with the sunflower seeds." He didn't look up at first. But then he said, almost under his breath, "Thank you." Just that. 2 words. But they cracked something open. Sophie froze, her eyes wide. "You're welcome," she whispered. And for the first time in years, I saw Dad's shoulders relax. Later, he told me, holding anger is like drinking poison and waiting for someone else to die. Months passed like pages turning gently. The fundraiser money had been returned, every cent that could be accounted for. Some donors refused to take it back, saying they preferred she put it toward hospice care. She did. Every time a patient couldn't afford medication, Sophie made sure it was covered. Every time a family couldn't pay for flowers or meals, she arranged them quietly, signing the donation anonymously. She never bragged about it. In fact, if you didn't know her story, you'd never guess who she'd been. But I knew. And sometimes, when I caught her standing under the willow tree after work, eyes closed, head tilted up toward the sky, I wondered if she was talking to someone. To the version of herself she'd finally forgiven. The following spring, the hospice garden held another memorial service. This time, Sophie was in charge of it. She'd spent weeks preparing, organizing candles, arranging lilies, even painting little wooden signs with the names of patients who'd passed that year. As people began to gather, I noticed something beautiful. No one looked at her with pity anymore. They looked at her with trust. When she stepped up to speak, the crowd went silent. Her voice was calm, clear, the kind of voice that carried the weight of someone who's lived through her own fire and come out softer, not colder. Grief, she said, isn't something you get over. It's something you learn to carry. Like love, it changes shape, but it never leaves you. Mom cried quietly beside me. Dad held her hand. And for the first time, our family stood together, not pretending, not hiding, just real and whole in a way we hadn't been in years. After the ceremony, Sophie and I stayed behind to clean up. The sky had turned gold with sunset, and the last of the candles flickered softly. She looked around the garden and said, "Do you remember when I said I wanted people to love me enough to notice?" I nodded. "Well," she said with a small smile, "they do now. But not because I'm sick. Because I'm honest." I laughed softly. "You always were dramatic." "Guess it runs in the family," she teased. We stood there for a while, watching the light fade. And I thought about all the versions of us that had lived and died in the past few years, the naive ones, the angry ones, the broken ones, and how somehow we'd made it through. A few weeks later, I came home to find an envelope on my porch. It was from Sophie. Inside was a handwritten letter and a photo. The photo was of her, standing in the hospice garden, holding a tray of fresh lilies. On the back, she'd written, "For the first time in my life, I'm planting things instead of pretending to wither." And the letter, I still have it, tucked inside my journal. It said, "Emma, you saved me, not by exposing me, but by refusing to give up on me afterward. I used to think love was about being adored. Now I know it's about being seen, even when you've made yourself unrecognizable. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve that kind of love." I read it twice, then 3 times. And for the first time since the whole ordeal began, I cried, not out of anger, not even relief, but something deeper. Something like grace. Sometimes I still think about those early days, the shock, the lies, the headlines, the shame. It feels like a story that happened to someone else. But then I look at Sophie now, the way she carries herself, the peace in her eyes, and I realize that pain can be a strange kind of teacher. It strips you bare. It takes everything you thought you needed. And then, if you're brave enough to face it, it gives you something truer in return. So here's what I've learned. People don't always lie because they're evil. Sometimes, they lie because they're empty. Because somewhere along the way, they started believing the truth wasn't enough. But when the truth finally comes out, when the mask cracks and the light gets in, that's when real love begins. Not the kind that saves you from consequences, but the kind that stays anyway. If you ever find yourself in my shoes, standing between truth and love, betrayal and forgiveness, remember this. You don't have to choose one or the other. You just have to choose honesty. Because only honesty lets healing take root. That's our story. The one that began with a lie and ended in something real. When people ask me how I forgave her, I never have a simple answer. Because forgiveness isn't a doorway you walk through once. It's a path you keep choosing, step after step, even when your heart still remembers the weight of what was done. My sister's lie broke something in all of us. But maybe that's what the truth is meant to do sometimes, break you open, so that grace has somewhere to land. Now, when I see her in that hospice garden, her hands covered in soil, her smile quiet and real, I don't see the girl who faked her sickness. I see the woman who healed herself by helping others live. And maybe that's what redemption really is. Not erasing the past, but learning how to grow through it. So, if you've ever been lied to, or if you were the one who told the lie, ask yourself this. Would you rather hold on to the hurt or hold space for someone's chance to change? Because at the end of it all, forgiveness doesn't make you weak. It just proves that your heart is strong enough to choose peace. Would you have done what I did? Tell me in the comments below. And if my story found its way to your heart, subscribe and stay a while. Because here, we don't run from the truth. We learn to live through it.